A biker gang storms into a quiet Nevada bar, shoving tables aside and terrorizing innocent customers trying to enjoy their evening. When the elderly bar owner refuses to pay protection money, the 300-pound enforcer backhands her across the face. But it's when they shove a war widow to the ground, scattering her dead husband's purple heart across the floor, that the quiet stranger in the corner booth finally looks up. The bikers have no idea they just assaulted a grieving widow in front of Donnie Yen himself. This soft-spoken man sipping green tea isn't just another customer. He's a martial arts master who's spent decades perfecting the art of destroying thugs exactly like them. The Iron Wolves think they're terrorizing helpless senior citizens, but they've actually cornered a legend who's been watching them disrespect everything he holds sacred. As the widow's military pin rolls across the wooden floor, the action star rises with deadly calm, his entire demeanor shifting from mild-mannered stranger to predatory hunter. The bikers keep laughing and trashing the place, completely unaware they're about to face a man whose Wing Chun precision has humiliated countless opponents on screen and off. What happens when 20 leather-clad thugs pick the wrong fight in the wrong bar? Will any of them survive learning why you never assault a war widow in front of a martial arts legend? What happened next would terrorize the Iron Wolves for the rest of their pathetic lives. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Dusty Rose Tavern sat like a weathered sentinel on the edge of Millfield, Nevada, where the desert wind carried stories of better times and the neon beer signs flickered against windows that had seen 3 generations of working folks come and go. Martha Calloway wiped down the mahogany bar with the same methodical care she'd used for 25 years, her calloused hands moving in practiced circles while her sharp blue eyes surveyed the evening crowd. Walt Kowalski hunched over his usual stool at the far end, his thick white mustache hiding a slight smile as he nursed his second beer and listened to Betty O'Malley's animated retelling of Mrs. Henderson's ongoing feud with the neighborhood cats. The retired postal worker's green eyes sparkled with mischief as she gestured with her coffee cup, her red-silver hair catching the warm light from the overhead fixtures. "I'm telling you, Walt, that woman's got 17 cats now," Betty declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd walked every street in Millfield for 32 years. 17. I counted them when I delivered her Social Security check. Elena Rodriguez sat quietly in the middle booth, her weathered fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she half listened to the familiar banter. The war widow's dark eyes held depths of grief that 2 years hadn't fully healed, but there was warmth there too, the kind that came from finding family in unexpected places. Her late husband's dog tags rested beneath her simple blue cardigan, a constant reminder of love and sacrifice. Martha glanced at the corner booth where the quiet stranger sat with his green tea, as he had every evening for 2 weeks. Donnie Yen, he'd said his name was, always polite, always left exact change plus a generous tip. The Asian man in his late 50s seemed almost fragile in his simple button-down shirt and dark jeans, but something in his kind eye suggested depths that ran deeper than Millfield's old mining shafts. The tavern hummed with the comfortable rhythm of a community that still believed in handshakes and keeping your word. This was a place where folks looked out for each other, where Martha's coffee was always fresh and the jukebox still played songs that meant something. It was the heart of a town that time hadn't quite forgotten, where decency still mattered and respect was earned through character, not volume. Outside, the Nevada night stretched endless and star-filled, peaceful as a prayer. Donnie Yen set his porcelain cup down with deliberate precision, the soft clink barely audible above Betty's laughter and the distant hum of the ancient air conditioning unit. For 14 nights, he'd occupied this same corner booth, watching the gentle rhythms of small-town life unfold around him like scenes from a movie he'd never been allowed to star in. The choice of green tea had raised eyebrows initially. This was beer and whiskey country, but Martha had accommodated without question, brewing it fresh each evening with the same care she showed every customer. That simple kindness had meant more to him than she could know. In Hong Kong, in Hollywood, in the blur of premieres and fight choreography sessions, genuine hospitality had become as rare as honest conversation. Danny's weathered hands rested flat on the scarred wooden table, hands that had signed autographs. For millions of fans who saw them as weapons of cinema magic. But here, under the dusty rose's warm lights, they were just the hands of a man trying to disappear into anonymity, seeking something he'd lost in the chaos of fame and the devastating silence that followed his wife's death that he'd chosen the name. Carefully, Donnie Yen, common enough to blend in, simple enough to remember when people asked. The retirement announcement had been brief, professional, final. Pursuing new interests, his publicist had said. What they meant was fleeing from the violence that seemed to follow his celebrity like a shadow, from the endless parade of challengers and wannabes who saw him as a target rather than a human being. Millfield offered something precious, the chance to be ordinary. Here, Elena's gentle nod when he entered each evening held no expectation of martial arts demonstrations. Walt's gruff acknowledgement carried the weight of genuine acceptance. Betty's cheerful chatter never once mentioned movies or fame. Martha simply kept his tea coming and his corner booth reserved, as if he'd been part of the furniture for decades instead of days. The regulars had gradually warmed to his presence, their initial wariness giving way to the kind of casual inclusion that small towns either offered freely or withheld forever. They'd seen him help Martha carry cases of beer from the storage room, noticed how he always cleaned up after himself, observed the way he listened more than he spoke. What they couldn't see was the profound peace their acceptance brought to a soul that had forgotten what belonging felt like. The rumble started as a distant vibration in the desert air, growing steadily until it became an earthquake of chrome and steel thundering down Millfield's main street. 20 Harley-Davidsons roared in formation, their riders' black silhouettes against the dying light, leather-clad harbingers of violence and chaos. Their head rode Tank Morrison, 300 pounds of muscle gone to fat, his shirtless bulk barely contained by a filthy leather vest. Prison tattoos crawled across his massive arms like angry scars, and the teardrop marks beneath his left eye proclaimed his willingness to kill without hesitation. His small, cruel eyes swept the quiet streets with predatory hunger, searching for weakness to exploit and fear to harvest. Behind him, the iron wolves spread out like a plague of locusts, their bikes modified for intimidation rather than speed. Skulls adorned handlebars, Confederate flags snapped from sissy bars, and every rider carried the casual arrogance of men who'd learned that violence opened doors that politeness couldn't reach. They'd been moving through Nevada's small towns. Like a biblical plague, their method brutally simple. Identify the local gathering place, demand protection money, and make examples of anyone foolish enough to resist. 3 towns had already fallen to their extortion, their business owners cowering behind locked doors and counting the cost of cowardice in dollars and dignity. Tank's brother, King Morrison, had planned this campaign with military precision, each target chosen for maximum psychological impact and minimum resistance. Small towns meant frightened people, isolated communities with no backup coming, places where a show of overwhelming force could break spirits before the first punch was thrown. The Iron Wolves had evolved from a simple motorcycle club into something far more dangerous, a mobile army of criminals who understood that fear was their most potent weapon. They recruited from prisons and street gangs, selecting members for their capacity for violence and their hunger for easy money. Each man wore his cruelty like a badge of honor, competing to see who could inflict the most terror on the innocent. They roared past Millfield's modest homes and shuttered businesses. Porch lights began clicking off and curtains snapping shut. The desert wind carried the stench of their exhaust and something darker, the smell of predators who'd caught the scent of prey. The dusty Rose Tavern glowed like a beacon ahead, its neon signs promising warmth and community, everything the Iron Wolves existed to destroy. The tavern door exploded inward with a crash that sent Betty's coffee cup flying and turned every head toward the sudden intrusion. Tank Morrison filled the doorway like a mountain of malevolent flesh, his dead eyes sweeping the room with practiced assessment. Behind him, a dozen Iron Wolves poured through the entrance, their boots thundering against the wooden floor as they spread out to cut off any escape routes. Well, Tank's voice rumbled like grinding gravel, his lips twisting into a sneer that revealed yellowed teeth. Looks like we found ourselves a real cozy little place here. He gestured toward his men, who began overturning tables and chairs with casual brutality, their laughter harsh and predatory. Martha stepped forward, her 67 years of experience dealing with difficult customers giving her a composure that belied the terror clawing at her chest. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to shut up, Grandma." Tank's massive hand swept across the bar, sending glasses crashing to the floor in an explosion of amber liquid and shattered crystal. "This here establishment just came under new management. The Iron Wolves are setting up shop, and you're going to help us feel welcome." Walt's weathered hands clenched into fists around his beer bottle, decades of military training warring with the arithmetic of impossibility. Betty had gone pale, her notebook clutched against her chest like a shield. Elena sat frozen, her dark eyes wide with the kind of terror that came from recognizing evil in its purest form. "Now here's how this works," Tank continued, his voice carrying the casual authority of a man accustomed to instant obedience. "You're going to close down for a week while we conduct our business. And when you reopen, you're going to pay us $500 a month for protection." His laugh was like breaking glass. "Protection from us, mostly." "I won't do it," Martha said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This place has been serving decent folks for 30 years. I won't let you turn it into some kind of—" The backhand came without warning, Tank's massive palm catching Martha across the cheek with enough force to send her stumbling backward into the mirrored wall behind the bar. Blood trickled from her split lip as she slumped against the shelves, 3 decades of proud ownership reduced to helpless victim in a single brutal moment. The sound of the impact seemed to echo forever in the sudden silence, while the Iron Wolves watched with the detached interest of men who'd seen this show too many times to count. Elena Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of Miguel's dog tags against her chest as she watched Martha struggle to her feet, blood staining the bar owner's chin like a crimson badge of humiliation. The sight triggered something primal in the war widow. Memories of her husband's letters describing bullies with guns who preyed on the defenseless, cowards who mistook cruelty for strength. "That's enough," Elena said, rising from her booth, with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd buried her heart in Arlington Cemetery. Her voice carried across the tavern like a steel blade wrapped in velvet, cutting through the Iron Wolf's laughter with unexpected authority. Tank turned toward her, with the lazy interest of a predator spotting fresh prey. "Well, looky here. Grandma's got herself a friend." His small eyes glittered with malicious anticipation as he studied Elena's modest cardigan and sensible shoes, cataloging weakness like a connoisseur of suffering. "You don't understand what you're doing," Elena continued, stepping into the center of the room despite the terror hammering in her chest. "These are good people. They've done nothing to deserve this treatment." Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady, charmed by the memory of Miguel's courage under fire. "Is that right?" Tank's massive bulk shifted forward, closing the distance between them with surprising speed. "Well, maybe you need a lesson in respect too, lady." The shove came like a freight train, Tank's enormous hands catching Elena in the chest and launching her backward with contemptuous ease. She crashed into a table, her slight frame no match for 300 pounds of malevolent force, and tumbled to the floor in a tangle of overturned chairs and scattered napkins. The purple heart pin, Miguel's final gift from a grateful nation, tore loose from her cardigan and skittered across the worn wooden planks, coming to rest beneath the jukebox like a fallen star. Elena lay stunned, her breath coming in short gasps, while the Iron Wolves erupted in fresh laughter at the sight of another helpless victim. But in the corner booth, a porcelain teacup settled onto its saucer with the soft finality of a sword being drawn from its sheath. Donnie Yen's eyes followed the purple heart as it rolled across the floor, the small piece of metal carrying the weight of sacrifice and honor that these animals would never comprehend. The sight of Elena, this gentle widow who'd lost everything to service and country, being brutalized by laughing thugs ignited something that transcended mere anger. He rose from the corner booth with fluid grace, his entire demeanor shifting, like water becoming ice. The mild-mannered stranger who'd sipped tea and observed in silence vanished, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous. Every line of his body spoke of coiled potential, of violence held in perfect check until the moment it chose to be unleashed. "Gentlemen," Donnie said quietly, his voice carrying across the tavern with the soft authority of distant thunder. I think you should leave. The laughter died first, replaced by the kind of silence that comes when predators suddenly realize they're no longer alone at the top of the food chain. Tank turned slowly, his cruel features twisted into a sneer that didn't quite mask the flicker of uncertainty in his dead eyes. And who the hell are you supposed to be, old man? Tank's voice carried forced bravado, but his massive frame had shifted into a defensive posture that betrayed his instincts. Danny stepped forward with economical precision, each movement flowing into the next like choreographed poetry. Someone who doesn't like seeing widows pushed around by cowards. Cowards. Tank's face flushed purple with rage. Razor, show this fossil what happens to heroes. Razor Rick, all prison muscle and misplaced confidence, lunged forward with a wild haymaker that should have connected with devastating force. Instead, it met empty air as Danny flowed aside like smoke, his response coming faster than thought. A precise strike to the nerve cluster beneath Rick's ear that dropped the biker like a felled tree. The unconscious thug hit the floor with a meaty thud that seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. 12 pairs of eyes stared at the impossible sight, their supposedly invincible enforcer unconscious before he'd landed a single blow. Danny straightened slowly, his kind eyes now holding depths that spoke of decades perfecting the art of controlled violence. Anyone else feel like picking on senior citizens tonight? What followed transcended mere fighting. It became an exhibition of martial arts mastery that transformed the dusty rows into a stage for controlled devastation. Danny moved like water given form, flowing around the biker's clumsy attacks with supernatural grace while delivering strikes with surgical precision. A pool cue became an extension of his will, spinning in perfect arcs that found nerve clusters and pressure points with mathematical accuracy. 3 iron wolves crumpled before they understood what was happening, their bodies betraying them as Danny's Wing Chun training rendered their bulk meaningless against properly applied technique. The jukebox provided both obstacle and opportunity, as Danny used its bulk to redirect a charging biker's momentum, sending the man careening into his companions like a human bowling ball. Bar stools became shields and weapons, their solid oak construction perfect for blocking wild swings and delivering precisely measured responses. Tank watched in growing horror as his supposedly unstoppable crew fell like wheat before the scythe. This wasn't the chaotic brawling they were accustomed to. This was artistry, each movement serving multiple purposes, every strike calculated for maximum efficiency and minimum permanent damage. Danny's hands found the nerve clusters that dropped men instantly, his feet swept legs with timing that suggested supernatural awareness of his opponent's balance. He used their own aggression against them, redirecting their force until they became instruments of their own defeat. A broken chair leg became a staff in Danny's grip, spinning in defensive patterns that created an impenetrable barrier while striking with cobra-quick precision. When one biker drew a knife, Danny disarmed him with a technique so fluid it seemed like sleight of hand, the blade skittering harmlessly across the floor. The remaining iron wolves backed against the wall, their earlier confidence evaporating as they faced something beyond their comprehension. This wasn't just superior fighting skill. This was decades of discipline and training made manifest. The difference between brutality and artistry laid bare in broken bodies and shattered pride. Martha, Elena, Walt, and Betty watched in stunned silence as their quiet, tea-drinking neighbor systematically dismantled a gang of hardened criminals without breaking a sweat or losing his temper. Tank's massive frame pressed against the wall as recognition dawned in his small eyes, transforming confusion into something approaching terror. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the groans of his defeated crew. "You're Donnie Yen, the Hong Kong action star." The name hung in the air like an incantation, causing the townspeople to stare at their unassuming neighbor with new understanding. Donnie, not Danny, stood amid the wreckage of the Iron Wolves with the casual poise of a man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of controlled violence. "Guilty as charged," Donnie replied quietly, his voice carrying none of the triumph the moment might have warranted. He helped Elena to her feet with gentle hands, retrieving Miguel's purple heart and placing it carefully in her palm. "Are you hurt?" Elena shook her head, studying this man who'd revealed himself as someone far beyond her imagination. The action star she'd seen in countless films now stood before her in the flesh, having risked everything to protect a group of strangers in a forgotten Nevada town. Tank's laughter started as a wheeze before building into something genuinely unhinged. "You have no idea what you've done, movie star." This was just the advance team. My brother King's got 60 Iron Wolves camped 5 miles outside town, and they're packing serious hardware, military surplus, explosives, the kind of firepower that levels buildings. The biker's cruel smile returned as he delivered his devastating revelation. "King's been planning this for months, ever since we heard you'd gone into hiding. Tomorrow morning, unless this town delivers $500,000 cash, we're going to burn Millfield to the ground. Every building, every business, every last person who showed you kindness." Donnie's face remained impassive, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Your brother has issues with me, not these people." "Wrong again, hero." Tank spat blood onto Martha's clean floor. "See, King used to work Hollywood stunts until you got him blacklisted for being too aggressive. Cost him everything: career, family, respect. Now he's built himself an army, and your little demonstration here just painted targets on everyone you tried to protect." The weight of unintended consequences settled over the tavern like a shroud, transforming victory into the promise of apocalypse. The silence that followed Tank's revelation felt heavier than the desert air outside, pressing down on the group as they absorbed the magnitude of what Donnie's presence had brought upon them. He stood amid the groaning bikers, no longer the mysterious tea drinker, but a man whose past had just condemned an entire town to violence. "I came here to disappear," Donnie said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of profound regret. "After my wife died, I couldn't stand the noise anymore. The cameras, the challenges, the endless parade of people wanting to prove themselves against a movie star." He gestured toward the unconscious iron wolves scattered across Martha's floor. "But it follows me everywhere." Elena stepped forward, Miguel's purple heart clutched in her weathered hands. "You didn't ask for this any more than we did. Sometimes trouble finds good people, no matter how hard they try to avoid it." Martha dabbed, blood from her split lip with a bar towel, her blue eyes blazing with determination rather than fear. "This King character sounds like he was planning to hit Millfield regardless. At least now we've got someone who can fight back." "You don't understand." Donnie shook his head, frustration bleeding through his controlled demeanor. "King Morrison isn't just some biker gang leader. He's smart, organized, and he's been building toward this moment for years. The man who got fired from my film set has become something far more dangerous. A criminal mastermind with military resources and 60 armed followers." Walt's weathered hands worked the brim of his baseball cap as he processed the tactical situation. "So we're looking at a small army with heavy weapons, led by someone with a personal vendetta against our new neighbor here." His Korean War training kicked in automatically. "What kind of timeline are we facing?" Tank said. "Tomorrow morning." Betty offered, her postal worker's precision cutting through the chaos. "That gives us maybe 10 hours to figure something out." Donnie looked around the room at these people who'd welcomed him without question, who'd become something precious in his lonely exile. Their acceptance had given him the first peace he'd known since his wife's death, and now his presence threatened to destroy everything they'd built together. "I should leave," he said simply. "Draw them away from Millfield." "Like hell," Elena replied with surprising steel. Word spread through Millfield with the efficiency that only small towns could manage, carried by Betty's encyclopedic knowledge of who needed to know what and when. Within 2 hours, the Dusty Rose had transformed into an impromptu war council, filled with residents who'd arrived expecting answers and found themselves facing the impossible. Some wanted Donnie gone immediately, their fear overriding any gratitude for his earlier heroics. Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store, argued loudly that one man's problems shouldn't endanger 300 innocent people. "We didn't ask for this," he repeated, his voice cracking with barely controlled panic. But Elena stood firm in her support, her quiet dignity silencing the doubters. "My husband died protecting people he'd never met because he believed some fights were worth having. This man risked everything to defend Martha and me. I won't abandon him now." Martha's position was equally unwavering. "The Dusty Rose has weathered recessions, mine closures, and 3 decades of progress trying to bypass us. We're not running from a bunch of overgrown bullies now." Her split lip gave her words additional authority, proof that she'd already paid a price for resistance. Walt emerged as the voice of practical military wisdom, his Korean War experience lending weight to his assessment. Whether Donnie stays or goes, those bikers aren't going to just ride away. They've invested too much in this operation, and men like that don't leave witnesses behind. The retired mechanic spread a hand-drawn map across Martha's bar, marking escape routes and defensive positions with the methodical precision of someone who'd faced impossible odds before. We're looking at a siege situation with limited resources and no backup coming. Betty contributed her intimate knowledge of Millfield's geography, detailing every building, back road, and hiding place that 32 years of postal routes had revealed. The old mine shafts could provide shelter for non-combatants, she suggested, her green eyes bright with strategic thinking that as midnight approached. The group that remained represented Millfield's core, the people who'd rather fight for their home than abandon it to predators. Elena, Martha, Walt, Betty, and a handful of others formed around Donnie like a defensive perimeter, their commitment transforming fear into determination. All right, Donnie said finally, studying the faces around him. If we're doing this, we do it right. Dawn came too quickly, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and gold, while Donnie transformed the dusty rose into something approaching a fortress. His decades of film experience with choreographed combat had taught him more than just fighting. He understood tactics, positioning, and the psychology of violence in ways that surprised even Walt's military background. Pressure points aren't just for movies, Donnie explained to Elena as he guided her hands to the nerve clusters beneath a person's ear. Apply firm pressure here, and even Tank Morrison goes down. It's not about strength, it's about precision and confidence. Elena's weathered fingers found the spot with surprising accuracy, her years of caring for Miguel during his recovery from combat injuries having given her an intimate knowledge of human anatomy. Like this. Exactly. You're a natural. Donnie's encouragement carried genuine warmth despite the circumstances. Your husband trained you better than you realize. Walt proved equally adept at translating his mechanical expertise into defensive preparations. The retired mechanic rigged improvised alarms using car parts and fishing line, creating an early warning system that would announce any approach to the tavern. His knowledge of leverage and structural engineering helped fortify windows and doors. With materials scavenged from the hardware store, Betty's contribution proved invaluable as she coordinated communications between the defenders and the town's remaining residents. Her postal routes had given her detailed knowledge of every family, every routine, every resource that Millfield could offer in a crisis. The Hendersons have a ham radio, she reported, consulting her ever-present notebook. And old Doc Morrison, no relation to the bikers, still has medical supplies from when he ran the clinic. Martha moved through the preparations with grim determination, her split lip serving as a constant reminder of what they were fighting against. The tavern owner had spent her life making people feel welcome. Now she was learning to make others feel unwelcome with extreme prejudice. As the morning light strengthened, the defenders found something unexpected in their preparations: unity. The shared danger had stripped away the small differences and petty grievances that divide communities, leaving only the essential truth that some things were worth defending regardless of the cost. Outside, dust clouds on the horizon announced the approaching storm. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard of Betty's borrowed laptop, her determination to understand their enemy driving her through page after page of search results. What she found in the depths of internet archives painted a picture far more disturbing than simple criminal opportunism. Found him, she announced, her voice tight with discovery. King Morrison, born Kevin Morrison, worked Hollywood stunts for 15 years before being terminated from the set of Iron Dragon in 2019. She turned the screen toward the group, revealing a newspaper clipping that made Donnie's face go pale. The headline read, "Stuntman fired after endangering crew in reckless accident." The accompanying photo showed a younger King Morrison, his face twisted with rage as security escorted him from the set. The article detailed how his excessive aggression during a fight scene had sent 3 crew members to the hospital. "I remember that day," Donnie said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of unintended consequences. He was supposed to pull his punches during a barroom brawl sequence, but he kept escalating the violence. When I called for a safety review, he came after me with a broken bottle. Waltz studied the article with military precision, noting details that painted an even grimmer picture. Says here he was already under investigation for assault charges. Your complaint was just the final straw. But Elena had found something worse. In her deeper research, look at this. After losing his Hollywood career, he spent 2 years in San Quentin for armed robbery. That's where he connected with the original Iron Wolves leadership. When the old president died in a prison fight, King took over and transformed them from a simple motorcycle club into something resembling a criminal army. The laptop screen showed a progression of mugshots and police reports that chronicled King's descent from failed stuntman to criminal mastermind. Each arrest had been more sophisticated, more violent, building toward the military-style organization now threatening Millfield. He's been planning this for years, Betty realized, her postal worker's mind recognizing patterns of escalation. Every job, every recruitment, every strategic move has been building toward getting revenge on you. Donnie stared at the evidence of his unintended role in creating this monster. A safety complaint meant to protect innocent crew members had apparently spawned years of hatred that culminated in an entire town being held hostage. 300 people are in danger because I tried to do the right thing 5 years ago, he said. No, Elena replied firmly. 300 people are in danger because evil exists, and sometimes it wears a familiar face. The first assault came with the rising sun, 30 iron wolves roaring down Main Street in formation, while King Morrison coordinated from his command post on the distant ridge. But they met resistance they hadn't expected. Donnie's tactical preparation and the townspeople's desperate courage transforming amateur defenders into something approaching a military unit that Walt's improvised early warning system gave them precious seconds to take positions as the bikers spread out to surround the dusty rows. Elena crouched behind the reinforced bar, her hands steady on the hunting rifle Doc Morrison had contributed to their arsenal, while Betty coordinated movements through whispered communications with defenders at other positions. Remember, Donnie called out, his voice carrying calm authority despite the chaos erupting around them. We're not trying to kill anyone, just convince them this isn't worth the price. The bikers' first wave broke against prepared positions. Like surf against stone, Donnie moved between windows with supernatural grace, his precise strikes dropping attackers without permanent damage, while Walt's mechanical expertise turned everyday objects into effective weapons. A pressure cooker rigged with firecrackers sent 3 bikers fleeing in terror, convinced they'd encountered military explosives. Martha proved surprisingly effective with a modified baseball bat, her decades of handling difficult customers translating into an ability to discourage unwanted advances with extreme prejudice. When 2 iron wolves tried to breach the back entrance, they encountered the bar owner's practical approach to problem-solving and decided retreat was the better part of valor. Elena's shot took out the lead biker's front tire at 50 yards, sending him tumbling across the asphalt in a spectacular crash that convinced his companions that grandmothers with hunting rifles were not to be underestimated. Betty's coordination kept ammunition and supplies flowing to defenders while maintaining communication with the scattered townspeople. After 20 minutes of sustained combat, the surviving bikers retreated in disorder, leaving behind damaged motorcycles and wounded pride. The defenders cheered as dust clouds marked the Iron Wolves' withdrawal, their impossible victory against overwhelming odds feeling like vindication of everything they believed about courage and community. But on the ridge, King Morrison lowered his binoculars with a cold smile, having learned everything he needed to know about their capabilities, positions, and weaknesses. The satellite phone's harsh ring cut through the celebration like a blade, its electronic shriek transforming victory into dread in a single moment. Martha answered with trembling fingers, her face going ashen as King Morrison's voice filled the sudden silence through the speaker function. Congratulations on your little demonstration. King's cultured tones carried none of his brother's crude brutality, replaced by something far more chilling. Intelligent malice wrapped in false civility. I'm particularly impressed with the old lady's marksmanship. 70-yard shot on a moving target? Outstanding. Elena felt ice forming in her chest as the voice continued with predatory satisfaction. But I'm afraid playtime is over. You see, While you were focused on my advance team, my real soldiers were visiting other parts of town, specifically the Riverside Motel where a certain young lady from California is staying. The laptop screen flickered to life, showing grainy video footage that made Elena's world collapse. Her granddaughter Sarah, visiting for spring break, sat bound to a chair in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, her college sweatshirt torn and her young face streaked with tears of terror. Sarah's a lovely girl, King continued with casual cruelty. Studying journalism at UC Berkeley, wants to change the world through honest reporting. She reminds me of myself at that age, so full of hope and naive idealism. Donnie stepped forward, his voice deadly calm. Let her go, King. This is between us. Oh, but it's so much more than that now. King's laughter held no warmth. You see, Mr. Yen, you cost me everything. Career, family, respect. Now I'm going to cost you something precious in return. In 1 hour, you will walk out of that tavern alone and unarmed. You will submit to public execution while the entire town watches, proving that heroes are just men who die like anyone else. The terms were delivered with surgical precision. Refuse, and the girl dies slowly while I broadcast it live. Try any heroics, and she dies. Attempt to evacuate the town, and the explosives my men have placed around Millfield's perimeter will turn your rescue into a funeral pyre. Elena stared at her granddaughter's terrified face on the screen, 20 years old and innocent of everything except the crime of loving her grandmother. Please, she whispered. She has nothing to do with this. Neither did my career, King replied. 1 hour, Mr. Yen. Don't keep us waiting. Donnie stood before the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on his face while the weight of impossible choices pressed down like a physical force. In 60 years of life, he'd faced countless challenges, grueling film shoots, dangerous stunts, the devastating loss of his wife. But none had prepared him for this moment when heroism meant walking towards certain death, the reflection staring back showed a man who'd spent decades portraying invincible warriors, now confronting the limits of human capability. Sarah's terrified face haunted his thoughts, her innocence a stark reminder that some prices were too high to pay, even for principles. Elena found him there, her weathered hands carrying Miguel's final letter, the one that had arrived 3 days after the funeral, delayed by military bureaucracy, but rich with a dead soldier's wisdom about impossible choices and necessary sacrifices. Miguel wrote this after a particularly bad firefight, she said softly, unfolding the worn paper with reverent care. His unit was pinned down, outnumbered 5-1, with wounded men they couldn't evacuate. Everyone expected him to call for artillery support, even though it meant leveling the village they were trying to protect. Donnie read the cramped handwriting that spoke of leadership in the face of impossible decisions. The hardest part of command isn't choosing between right and wrong. It's choosing between wrong and worse. Sometimes the only way to save everyone is to risk everything. But Miguel found a third option. Elena continued, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. He studied the enemy's pattern, noticed they changed guard positions every 20 minutes like clockwork. Military discipline was their strength, but also their weakness. They were predictable. She pointed toward the laptop where Betty had been analyzing the video footage with her postal worker's eye for detail. Look at the light patterns in that warehouse. The shadows move exactly 12 degrees every hour. I've walked past that building 1,000 times. It's the old Morrison mining facility, 3 miles east. Walt emerged from the back room, his mechanical expertise having detected something crucial in the audio track. Those explosives King mentioned? Listen to the background noise when he calls. That's a generator running, specific RPM pattern. I serviced that exact model for 15 years. It's got a fuel leak that makes it run rich. Means it's got to be refueled every 4 hours. The pieces of a desperate plan began forming as Elena continued reading Miguel's letter aloud. When facing impossible odds, don't fight the enemy's strength. Make them fight your fight on your terms. The warehouse sat like a cancer against the desert landscape, its corrugated metal walls baking in the afternoon sun while King Morrison paced inside with the nervous energy of a predator sensing something amiss. Sarah Rodriguez remained bound to her chair, but her tears had dried, replaced by the kind of steely determination that ran in her family's bloodline. Outside, Donnie walked slowly down the dirt road toward what everyone believed was his execution. His hands raised in apparent surrender while King's men emerged from concealment with weapons trained on his approaching figure. The Iron Wolves' leader smiled with genuine satisfaction as his years of planning reached their climax. "The great Donnie Yen," King called out, his voice echoing across the desert. "Action hero, martial arts master, the man who destroyed my life." With a single complaint. "How does it feel to be helpless?" But 3 miles away, Walt's mechanical genius and Betty's geographical knowledge had converged into something approaching a miracle. The postal worker's detailed understanding of Millfield's underground mining tunnels, combined with the mechanic's expertise with controlled explosions, had created a network of precisely timed charges beneath the Iron Wolves' perimeter positions. Elena, crouched in the abandoned mine shaft that connected to the warehouse's foundation, Miguel's tactical wisdom guiding her movements as she worked to free her granddaughter from below, while the bikers focused on Donnie's apparent surrender above. "You want to know the difference between us?" Donnie asked, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air as he stopped 20 yards from the warehouse. "You see enemies everywhere. I see family worth protecting." King's laughter died as the first explosion erupted beneath his eastern perimeter, Walt's precise charges disabling vehicles and scattering guards without lethal force. The controlled detonations rolled across the landscape like thunder, each blast eliminating another escape route while avoiding the warehouse where Sarah remained captive. "What the hell?" King spun toward his communications equipment, finding only static as Betty's postal knowledge had guided them to every relay station and communication hub the Iron Wolves had established. Sarah's bonds fell away as Elena emerged through the floor hatch, her grandmother's presence transforming terror into hope. But King, his careful plans crumbling around him, drew his sidearm with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. The explosion that followed wasn't part of anyone's plan. The warehouse explosion sent a column of black smoke into the desert sky, its twisted metal frame collapsing like a house of cards while Donnie sprinted through the debris field with inhuman speed. King's desperate gambit, triggering his own explosives rather than face defeat, had turned the rescue into a race against time and falling steel. Elena shielded Sarah with her body as concrete chunks rained around them, her grandmother's fierce protectiveness creating a pocket of safety in the chaos. "Stay low," she whispered, her voice steady despite the apocalypse erupting overhead. "We're getting out of here." Donnie's decades of stunt work served him now as he navigated the collapsing structure with supernatural grace, his body moving through spaces that shouldn't have existed while his mind calculated angles and timing with mathematical precision. A falling beam missed him by inches. A secondary explosion pushed him forward rather than backward as he used its force to propel himself toward the trapped women. "This way," he called, his voice cutting through the roar of destruction as he cleared a path through the wreckage. Elena and Sarah followed, the older woman's surprising agility testament to her postal worker's conditioning and the younger's college athlete reflexes keeping pace despite her ordeal. Behind them, King Morrison emerged from his command bunker like an avenging demon, his face blackened by smoke and twisted with psychotic rage. The careful mastermind had vanished, replaced by something primal and unstable that blamed Donnie for every failure in his miserable existence. "You destroyed everything," King screamed, his voice barely human as he fired wild shots at the fleeing figures. "My career, my life, my perfect revenge, all ruined because you won't just die." The trio reached the mining tunnel entrance as the warehouse's main structure finally surrendered to gravity, its death throes sending tremors through the desert floor. Walt's precisely placed charges had done their work perfectly. The Iron Wolves' perimeter was in shambles, their vehicles disabled, their communications severed, but the real battle was just beginning as King's remaining followers rallied around their deranged leader. Their loyalty born of shared violence and the knowledge that surrender meant prison or worse. The final confrontation would be fought on Millfield streets, where communities stood against chaos. The dusty rows had transformed into something approaching a fortress as Elena, Martha, Walt, and Betty prepared for the final assault with grim determination. Sarah Rodriguez, despite her ordeal, insisted on joining the defense, her journalism students' courage refusing to accept the role of helpless victim. This isn't about fighting anymore, Donnie explained as he distributed the last of their improvised weapons. It's about standing together for something bigger than ourselves. Each of you represents what makes communities worth defending: courage, wisdom, loyalty, hope. Elena checked her rifle with the practiced efficiency Miguel had taught her during his home leaves, her weathered hands steady despite the magnitude of what approached. My husband always said the hardest battles aren't fought for territory or glory, they're fought for the right to live with dignity. Martha tested the weight of her reinforced baseball bat, her bar owner's pragmatism cutting through sentiment to focus on survival. 30 years I've been serving this community. Not about to let some psychopath with daddy issues run me out now. Walt's mechanical genius had turned the tavern into a maze of defensive surprises, pressure plates that triggered distractions, improvised barriers that channeled attackers into kill zones, and enough booby traps to make advancing costly for anyone foolish enough to try. Betty coordinated their communications with the efficiency that had made her Millfield's information hub for 3 decades. Mrs. Patterson's watching from the church tower with binoculars. She'll signal when they start moving. Doc Morrison's standing by at the clinic for casualties. Sarah's youth brought energy and adaptability that complemented their experience, her college athletes' reflexes and modern technological knowledge filling gaps the older defenders couldn't address. I've got my phone recording everything. If we don't make it, at least there'll be evidence of what these animals did. As King's engines roared in the distance, Donnie looked around at these people who'd become his chosen family. They'd accepted him without reservation, defended him without question, and now prepared to die beside him without complaint. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you've already won. You've shown that ordinary people can be extraordinary when they stand together for what's right. Outside, the Iron Wolves gathered for their final assault on everything decent and good in the world. King Morrison walked down Main Street like a gunfighter from hell, his 6 remaining followers spread out behind him in loose formation, while the setting sun painted everything in shades of blood and gold. The careful mastermind had been stripped away by rage and desperation, leaving only the brutal core of a man who'd spent years nursing hatred until it consumed everything human inside him. Come out and face me, movie star, King's voice echoed off the empty storefronts, his words carrying the weight of 5 years' worth of festering resentment. No cameras, no stunt doubles, no choreographed bullshit. Just you and me settling this like men. Donnie emerged from the dusty rows with the fluid grace that had made him legendary, but this wasn't performance. This was the real thing, stripped of Hollywood polish and reduced to its essential truth. 2 men, each representing opposing philosophies, meeting where words had failed and only action remained. You had talent, King, Donnie said quietly, his voice carrying across the desert air with surprising sadness. Real talent. You could have built something meaningful instead of tearing everything down. Spare me the philosophy lesson. King's massive frame moved with surprising speed as he launched himself forward, his prison-honed fighting skills enhanced by military surplus armor and the desperate fury of a man with nothing left to lose. The battle moved through Millfield's heart like a force of nature, from the tavern's wooden porch to the church steps, across the old mining monument to the school playground where children once laughed. Each location held meaning for the community Donnie had learned to love, while King saw only symbols of everything that had rejected him. King's strength was massive, his techniques brutal but effective, honed in prison yards and back alley fights where survival mattered more than artistry. He fought with broken bottles and improvised weapons, using his size and reach to keep Donnie at distance while delivering devastating blows that would have crippled lesser men. But Donnie's martial arts transcended mere technique. It was philosophy, made manifest, years of discipline and spiritual training that had taught him to flow like water while striking like lightning. Every movement served multiple purposes, every defense became an attack, every retreat set up the next advance. The watching townspeople saw more than a fight. They witnessed the eternal struggle between creation and destruction. The combat escalated beyond mere physical confrontation as King drew a military knife, its serrated edge glinting in the dying light, while Donnie countered with a broken piece of fence post, transforming debris into an extension of his will. Their battle had evolved into something primal. Good versus evil made manifest in the most basic terms. The King's knife work showed prison training. Each thrust calculated to maim rather than kill quickly, designed to inflict maximum suffering before delivering the final blow. His massive frame used the weapon like a surgeon's scalpel, precise cuts meant to drain Donnie's strength through blood loss and pain. But Donnie's response transcended conventional weapon techniques, his improvised staff becoming an instrument of martial arts poetry. Wing Chun principles guided every block and counterstrike, turning King's aggression into opportunities for precisely targeted responses that accumulated damage like interest on a debt. The fight carried them through Millfield's geography, over Martha's carefully tended flower boxes, around Walt's restored pickup truck, past the memorial statue honoring the town's war dead. Each location added emotional weight to their struggle, transforming a personal vendetta into something larger. The King's military surplus gear provided protection but slowed his movements, while Donnie's simple civilian clothes allowed the fluid motion that was his greatest advantage. When King's knife caught him across the ribs, drawing blood that stained his button-down shirt, Donnie used the pain to fuel his focus rather than distract from it. The improvised staff splintered against King's armored vest, forcing Donnie to adapt instantly. He grabbed a handful of gravel from Martha's driveway, using it to blind King temporarily before closing distance for a series of nerve strikes that should have ended the fight. But King's hatred provided superhuman endurance, his fury overriding pain signals that would have dropped normal men. He caught Donnie in a bear hug that threatened to crack ribs, his massive arms squeezing with hydraulic pressure while his voice whispered threats about what he'd do to the townspeople after Donnie was dead. The mention of innocent victims triggered something deeper than technique in Donnie's response, a protective instinct that had guided every meaningful fight of his career, both real and fictional. His elbow found the nerve cluster beneath King's ear with surgical precision. King's massive frame absorbed the nerve strike like a mountain weathering lightning, his hatred providing supernatural resistance to techniques that should have dropped him instantly. Blood streamed from his split scalp where Donnie's elbow had connected, but the biker leader's grip only tightened with psychotic determination. "You think your movie magic works in the real world?" King snarled, lifting Donnie off his feet in a crushing bear hug that threatened to snap ribs like kindling. "I've been preparing for this moment for 5 years, studying every fight scene, learning every technique, building immunity to everything that made you famous." Donnie's vision blurred as oxygen became a precious commodity, his legendary conditioning no match for King's brute strength and mechanical advantage. The improvised weapons lay scattered around them like broken dreams while King's remaining followers closed in with renewed confidence. Elena watched in horror from the tavern window. As her protector, the man who'd risked everything for strangers struggled against impossible odds. The sight of Donnie's weakening resistance triggered memories of Miguel's final deployment, when her husband had faced his own moment of overwhelming darkness. "Get up," she whispered, her voice carrying across the desert air with surprising strength. "You don't fight for glory or revenge. You fight so others can live in peace." But King's victory seemed assured as he drove Donnie to his knees, the action star's legendary skills reduced to desperate survival instincts against an opponent who'd spent years preparing for this exact confrontation. The biker leader's laughter echoed off empty storefronts, harsh and triumphant. "Look at your hero now," King called to the hidden townspeople. "Broken, beaten, helpless, just like everyone else when the cameras stop rolling and the real world comes calling." Martha clutched, her baseball bat with white knuckles, every instinct screaming at her to intervene despite the futility. Walt's weathered hands clenched into fists as he watched decades of military honor personified in Donnie's struggle against insurmountable odds. But it was Elena who stepped from the tavern, Miguel's purple heart gleaming in her weathered palm. As she walked toward the two combatants with the quiet dignity of someone who'd buried her heart in Arlington Cemetery. "Heroes don't fight for glory," she said clearly. "They fight so others can live free." Elena's words cut through the desert air like a blade forged from loss and love, carrying the weight of Miguel's sacrifice and every widow's understanding that true heroism requires the willingness to lose everything for others. The Purple Heart In her palm caught the dying sunlight, transforming grief into something approaching divine inspiration. Donnie's eyes met Elena's across the dusty street, seeing in her weathered features the face of everyone he'd ever failed to protect. His wife, the crew members King had injured, every innocent victim of his celebrity's unintended consequences. But he also saw something else. Absolute faith in his ability to rise above human limitations when the cause demanded it. The transformation began from within, drawing on reserves that transcended physical conditioning or martial arts technique. This was the essence of every heroic role he'd ever played made manifest. The moment when ordinary men discover they're capable of extraordinary things because someone believes in them completely. King felt the change first as Donnie's seemingly broken body began to resist his crushing grip with renewed strength. "Impossible," the biker leader muttered, his confidence wavering as his victims' desperate gasps became controlled breathing, panic replaced by supernatural calm. "You made one mistake," Donnie said quietly, his voice carrying across the street, with crystalline clarity despite King's crushing embrace. "You assumed I was fighting for myself." The nerve strikes that followed moved beyond mere technique into the realm of martial arts philosophy made flesh. Each blow carried the weight of community protection. Every movement flowed from decades of discipline now focused through Elena's unwavering faith, and the townspeople's desperate need that King's armor became irrelevant against precision that found gaps with supernatural accuracy. His size advantage crumbled before speed that seemed to defy physics. His prison-learned brutality collapsed against techniques that had been refined through lifetimes of study and perfected through love rather than hatred. The watching Iron Wolves backed away as their invincible leader began to falter, his crushing grip loosening as Donnie's counterattacks systematically dismantled every advantage the biker had spent years building. This wasn't movie fighting. This was pure martial arts essence unleashed by someone who'd finally remembered what he was truly fighting for. Elena's smile carried Miguel's pride as justice finally found its voice. The final sequence unfolded with the terrible beauty of a natural force unleashed, Donnie's movements flowing like water while striking with the precision of surgical steel. King's desperate attempts at resistance crumbled before techniques that had transcended mere choreography to become expressions of perfect justice. Each strike served a purpose beyond damage. The nerve cluster that paralyzed King's knife hand, the pressure point that dropped him to his knees, the precise blow that rendered him unconscious without permanent harm. This wasn't revenge. It was the careful application of measured force by someone who understood the difference between justice and brutality that King's remaining followers found themselves facing not just Donnie's skills, but the unified resistance of an entire community. Martha emerged from the tavern with her baseball bat. Walt carried a tire iron with practiced efficiency, and Betty coordinated their movements with postal worker precision. Even Sarah, despite her ordeal, stood ready to defend the place that had protected her grandmother. The Iron Wolves discovered what their leader had never understood, that true strength comes from fighting for others rather than against them. Faced with opponents who drew power from love rather than hatred, the bikers' criminal bravado evaporated like mist before sunrise. One by one, they surrendered or fled, their motorcycles carrying them toward distant horizons while they're unconscious. Leader lay sprawled in Millfield's dust. The empire of Fear King had spent years building collapsed in minutes when confronted by people who refused to be intimidated. Elena knelt beside the defeated biker, her weathered hands checking for serious injury with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd tended Miguel's combat wounds. "He's alive," she reported, her voice carrying relief despite everything King had put them through. "Good," Donnie replied, his chest heaving with exhaustion but his eyes clear and peaceful. "Justice isn't about revenge, it's about stopping evil from spreading while preserving the possibility of redemption." Walt was already on his ham radio, calling for state police and medical assistance, while Betty coordinated with other towns to intercept fleeing Iron Wolves. The network that had defended Millfield now reached out to protect others from the scattered remnants of King's criminal organization. As sirens wailed in the distance, the community that had stood together against impossible odds began the work of healing. 6 months later, the rebuilt Dusty Rose Tavern gleamed under fresh paint and new neon. its grand reopening drawing crowds from across Nevada who'd heard the story of a small town that refused to surrender to fear. The new sign above the door read, "Community protected by family," crafted by Walt's skilled hands and blessed by Elena's unwavering faith. Martha moved behind the bar with renewed energy, her split lip having healed into a barely visible scar. That she were like a badge of honor. The tavern had become more than a business. It was a symbol of what communities could accomplish when they stood together against darkness. Elena served as Millfield's new deputy sheriff, her combination of postal worker efficiency and combat-tested courage, making her surprisingly effective at keeping the peace. Miguel's purple heart now shared space on her uniform with a badge that represented hope rather than loss, service rather than sacrifice. Walt led the volunteer fire department with military precision, his mechanical expertise having evolved into comprehensive emergency preparedness that kept the town ready for any crisis. Betty's communication networks had expanded into a regional early warning system that connected isolated communities across 3 counties. Sarah visited every holiday and summer break, her journalism studies having taken on new focus after witnessing firsthand how ordinary people could become extraordinary when circumstances demanded heroism. Her articles about Millfield had brought positive attention to small-town America and the values that still mattered, and Donnie Yen, no longer hiding behind the name Danny Chun, had found his true calling not as an action star, but as Millfield's protector and friend. The Hollywood past that had once seemed like a burden now served as preparation for his real role, teaching martial arts to local children while standing ready to defend the community that had given him purpose. The final scene of Every Perfect Day found him in the tavern's back room, leading a class of eager young students through basic Wing Chun forms while their parents watched from the bar. His patient instruction and gentle corrections showed them that true strength came from discipline, respect, and the willingness to protect others. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endless and peaceful, watched over by a community that had learned the most important lesson of all: home isn't a place you're born. It's a place worth fighting for. The autumn evening carried a crisp promise of winter as Donnie finished his final class of the day, watching 8-year-old Tommy Martinez execute a perfect block and counter sequence that would have made his Wing Chun masters proud. The boy's grandfather had been one of the Iron Wolves who fled that terrible night, but Tommy bore no shame for sins that weren't his own. "Remember," Donnie said softly, adjusting the child's stance with gentle hands, "martial arts isn't about fighting. It's about having the strength to choose not to fight when you don't need to." Elena appeared in the doorway, her deputy sheriff's uniform crisp despite a long day, keeping the peace in 3 neighboring counties. "How's our next generation of protectors coming along?" "Better than their teacher was at that age," Donnie admitted, watching the children bow respectfully before racing off to join their families in the main tavern. "They understand something it took me 60 years to learn: that real power comes from community, not individual skill." Martha's laughter drifted from the bar where she was serving Elena's granddaughter Sarah, now a successful investigative journalist whose book about Millfield had become a bestseller about hope in small-town America. The young woman had returned for the tavern's anniversary celebration, bringing with her a camera crew documenting how communities could heal from trauma through unity rather than division. "You know what I've realized?" Elena said, settling beside Donnie on the worn wooden bench where he'd once sat as an anonymous stranger. "Miguel always said that the best battles are the ones you win without firing a shot. What we built here, this family, this strength, that's victory in its purest form." Through the windows, they could see Walt instructing a group of teenagers in emergency preparedness, while Betty coordinated with other towns to share resources and information. The networks of support that had saved Millfield now extended across the region, proving that good ideas, like good people, had a way of spreading when given the chance. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and promise. While inside the dusty rows, 3 generations gathered around tables that had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature, choosing hope over fear with every shared meal and story. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.